Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and this is just a bizarre case. We've covered it intermittently over the last year or so, but this is the case of Imran Awan, who's a former systems administrator for Todd Christensen, a.k.a. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and many other Democrats on the Hill. He was arrested last year, about this time last year, when he tried to leave the country, ostensibly to return to Pakistan.
Oh, that's right.
He was taken into custody at Dulles Airport.
Didn't he have bags of cash on him or a suitcase full of cash?
Well, he had pled guilty to bank fraud involving withdrawing hundreds of thousands of dollars by lying on a mortgage application, pretending to have medical emergency. That was, and then he wired the money to Pakistan in January. He wasn't picked up until July when he tried to flee. But there's all kinds of other issues with his time as a IT guy for Wasserman Schultz and many other Democrats on the Hill that include unauthorized accessing of members of Congress, of the computers of members of Congress, and ultimately the files. And you have somebody who is sent family over to Pakistan and was in the process of fleeing there himself. So this has sort of been chalked up as a guy who was the caricature from the D.C. press corps. There's a guy who's like kind of money hungry and was trying to manipulate people in the system just to enrich himself. But obviously, if you're accessing records you're not entitled to access, you're talking about members of Congress with various security clearances, the exposure is potentially much more significant. And yet last week, Jeff Sessions, his Department of Justice, President Trump's Department of Justice, gave Awan a walk.
What?
And we need to understand why that might be. The person who's probably covered this with the most painstaking detail, even where the D.C. press corps has assiduously attempted to pay no mind, is Luke Rosiak from the Daily Caller, dailycaller.com. And Luke joins us now. Luke, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
In your latest piece on the topic, reporting on this pass that Awan is getting from DOJ, you break it down nicely in terms of kind of the two categories of issues. One, cybersecurity issues, and then secondly, theft-related issues. Why don't we start with the cybersecurity issues and just kind of lay it out for us?
Sure. So this guy started working for Wasserman Schultz around 10 years ago, and there's a limit to how much a congressional employee can make. I mean, a staffer can't make more than a member. So it seemed like he was making way more than any other IT guy. He was making like $165,000 a year. And then after that, he started adding his entire family to the payroll, which seemed to be a way to circumvent that cap. So before you know it, you've got these 6 Pakistani guys plus one of their Ukrainian wives. They got all the access to all the files and emails of 1 in 5 House Democrats because of their position as systems administrators. And what they start doing is they log into other people's offices who they don't even work for. And some of these members fired these guys because they noticed problems. Well, guess what? These guys started logging into the people's servers who had just fired them. They're taking data off the House network. They're violating, all the kind of basic IT protocols that you would have, not only in Congress, but even things that any prudent IT person in any small business would do. Basically, it's like the Wild West. I mean, they're logging in all kinds of places. You got data flying everywhere. And all this is going on Capitol Hill. It would blow people's minds, I think, to see how little it was sort of overseen and regulated. And when you look into these guys' backgrounds, not only were they breaking the rules and taking data off the House network, these are guys that have been in a lot of trouble in their lives. I mean, out of the brothers, there's 3 brothers and then a bunch of other relatives. They've got a bunch of criminal convictions. They're Pakistani citizens. They've been repeatedly accused of extortion and blackmail-like behavior in the past, which is obviously what you would be concerned about with people who had access to all this information. They're doing very strange things in Pakistan, sending all kinds of money over there, and they've got this business over in Pakistan, which has also been accused of fraud by all kinds of people. And this guy, Imran Awan, travels with an armed motorcade of government agents in Pakistan. And that's something that hasn't been explained by anyone. So Jeff Sessions, as he said, looked into it and basically gave this guy immunity and said, we've looked into it. We found he didn't do anything wrong in Congress, so we're not going to charge him with anything. And there's just so many unanswered questions here, including why the heck does this guy have an armed motorcade of Pakistani agents?
Well, it still blows my mind that he was able to strike a deal with the Department of Justice. But where is he now? Does he live in Pakistan still, and does still have armed security guards with him?
Well, so he lives in Virginia, and he had basically spent a couple months out of every year in Pakistan, and that's when he would have that protection detail. But he would work from Pakistan, logging in and administering congressional servers. And his former business partner claimed that he gave data to Pakistan. I mean, that hasn't been that's a direct on-the-record claim by this guy that knows him really well. So a lot of people hate this guy. They've been double-crossed by him. They think he'll do anything for money. Some of my sources are his relatives who came to me and said, my God, this guy is an urgent threat. This guy would sell his own mom for a penny. So that's the kind of guy. That's why I started following this very closely since over a year ago. People are very, very concerned about this guy, that he would stop at nothing to get money. How
did his family members, I mean, you're describing their history of run-ins with the law. How do they pass background checks in the first place to be a contractor or an employee of the federal government for members of Congress?
Well, that's one of the interesting things, is that background checks are required, as you would imagine, on Capitol Hill, but all 44 members of Congress, they were all Democrats, they all exempted these guys. Now, if you shouldn't exempt anyone, but if you're going to exempt someone, I mean, certainly not Pakistani citizens with no credentials, which I didn't even mention. Imran Awan had IT training. The rest of them didn't even have any experience in IT. So that's something that the Democrats haven't explained, and I basically reported months ago that they had all exempted them from background checks, and the Democrats refused to address it. And then a few months later, that was confirmed in a hearing in Congress, where now they're talking about changing those policies and making sure that they can't do that anymore. But the thing is, they were never supposed to do so in the first place.
Well, how in the world did Debbie Wasserman Schultz hire this guy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and they have an extraordinarily close relationship. They hang out together. Wasserman Schultz's daughter, Imran Awan, has a horse, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz basically brought her daughter over on a regular basis to ride his horse. Apparently Debbie Wasserman Schultz actually chose the name of Imran Awan's daughter. So they're like, they had this, and she gave him a Jewish name. So it's just like this incredibly close relationship in a way that's not at all normal. And this guy, again, I mean, he had full reign of the place. He had access to everything. They weren't monitoring him. And so the Inspector General found that, basically you mentioned that there's two things. There's theft and then hacking. It's kind of like how they got Al Capone for, tax issues, except I'm not trying to minimize the theft, because a theft scheme in Congress is a big deal. Basically, these guys were in charge of ordering hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, and they were falsifying financial records in ways that made the equipment disappear. Basically, they made everything appear as petty cash, so then it wasn't tracked. And some Democrats said a couple of years ago that, we think we've uncovered a theft scheme. Yvette Clarke from New York, Congresswoman from New York, she had a tenth of her annual budget disappear. So people had been raising the red flags about this guy for a long time and saying, my God, they're stealing from Congress. Well, and that triggered a review that eventually found those cybersecurity issues as well.
Well, if Wasserman Schultz and this Awan guy had such a close relationship, then why does he leave her laptop in a phone booth? I didn't even know they still existed, on Capitol Hill, that was ultimately taken by police, and then Wasserman Schultz had that famous or infamous interaction with the Capitol Hill police chief where she was demanding her laptop be returned.
Yeah, that's what you got. I mean, she may like him or may have liked him a few years ago, but you got to wonder whether he actually likes her or whether he's using these people. Mm-hmm. So basically, after he got caught during the election, and it's interesting because during the election, kind of at the heat of the election between Trump and Clinton, this was going on. There was a massive cybersecurity and sort of Democratic theft/corruption investigation going on Capitol Hill. And they worked very hard to make sure this didn't come out until after the election, if at all. So they punted and they let this guy stay on the network from like July, August, September of 2016 into right after Trump's inauguration. That's kind of when they finally said, all right, they kind of said, we got something going on here. He needs to be kicked off the network. So that whole time, he had access to all this stuff, and he knew that the cops were onto him. So he started freaking out. He started wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars over to Pakistan. He tried to go to the airport with, $12,000 in cash. His wife actually went to the FBI or to the airport with a similar amount of cash. The FBI found the cash and let her leave anyway, which is kind of like raises questions about the FBI's handling of this case.
That's right.
But so finally, he gets kicked out of the network and he's banned from the house in February of 2017. He comes into the House office building at midnight, takes Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop, and leaves it in the phone booth. An old, it's kind of like a cubby that used to be a phone booth. And he puts a piece of paper on top that says attorney-client privilege. So the cops get it, and they realize that he left it there because he left his ID too. And
like
they use it as
novel.
evidence. And basically, it sets up a situation where he's got all the access. It's kind of, to me, it seemed like a warning shot. I've got your stuff. Don't think I won't release it. So that triggered Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop to be in the hands of the DOJ and to be evidence in this case. But it couldn't quite be looked at because of this attorney-client privilege note. And that's when Debbie Wasserman Schultz threatened the Capitol Police with consequences if he didn't give back the evidence in this case.
But he's not her attorney or an attorney, right?
Correct. I mean, he had actually a former Hillary Clinton aide was his attorney. And a very, very aggressive guy, and he really worked through the media to kind of, spin this thing.
So I can understand why Democrats would want to bury this because it's so embarrassing and who knows what compromising information he has. Why would Jeff Sessions and Department of Justice take a pass on this guy? Yeah,
that's the key question here is, I mean, one can only speculate. I mean, it's the deep state. It's some of these same issues we've seen with the handling of, the Hillary Clinton investigation and how they kind of knew that some things happened there and they chose not to charge. We're seeing similar things here. So it's kind of like, is it just that the FBI has a lot of partisans in it and Jeff Sessions isn't getting the message, or is Jeff Sessions afraid to anger 44 Democrats because they obviously would have been furious? Does he just not have the backbone? But what's clear is that when they put out the statement saying we looked into it and we didn't find anything wrong, that's not true. The evidence is there, and I don't even think it's that. I think I do know more about this case than the FBI, but I think the FBI is aware of massive evidence, and they didn't prosecute anyway. So that's something that hasn't been explained. And it's even that you can get these guys on paper. There are elements of this case that can be proven by a first-year law student. For example, you have to fill out these ethics disclosures in the House saying, do you have any conflicts of interest? Do you have any outside income? Well, these guys were running, they had a dozen LLCs, and no one will say what these LLCs did. One of them was a car dealership, a purported car dealership called CIA, and it took $100,000 from an Iraqi government minister. So it seems to be a money laundering vessel to take money from foreign governments.
You're right.
And they didn't disclose this. So that's a felony right there. But somehow Jeff Sessions couldn't or wouldn't prove it.
You're right. This is like a John le Carre spy novel.
Something about him on that computer.
Well, Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter for dailycaller.com. Great reporting. Thank you for joining us and helping to break this down for us. We appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
I'm sure a movie about it will be out soon, right? Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer